Hello, fabulous friends and fans. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah, and this is another special series video where I answer your questions based on the interactions that we've been having on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and of course my website, nadiyashah.com. I really do appreciate it. I love interacting with you guys. I try to acknowledge the interactions, and when you ask me a question, even if it's in the comment section on YouTube as well, when you do ask questions that are related to astrology and technicalities and all these different things, I enjoy it so much. And I am keeping a list, and I'm making my way through this list. So this is me making my way through that list, and I appreciate your trust so much. Thank you. So Paul asked on Facebook, should he be watching videos for his horoscopes for his North Node sign? And so sort of the beginning of these special series videos has been the North Node videos. And that's because the North Node is so important to me where it comes to prediction. I really like working with the nodes. And so where it comes to actually watching horoscope videos based on the North Nodes, now this isn't a totally out there concept. It isn't an unusual concept. And really, I do think that essentially it's based on a technique, a theory, if you will, like each planet in your chart getting its own chart. For example, one very common technique, so there are tons of different techniques out there, astrological techniques. Yes, it's a very ancient practice. It has a strong tradition, certainly. However, as you can imagine, to be an astrologer, you have to be a person who trusts yourself, who's willing to experiment, who's open to new information. And astrologers can also be pretty inventive as well. And so there are always new ways of looking at the chart, new techniques emerging as well. Astrology is a living practice, responds to the culture that it's in. And as part of that, as we change, as we come to understand what it means to be human changes, so too does the astrology evolve right along with us. So as we find new planets, as we discover new things about ourselves, we discover new planets, we discover new asteroids, and that enriches the astrology. And what we also do is whether you want to call it discovered, whether you want to call it develop, new techniques, new ways of understanding, of interpreting, looking at birth charts and other things as well. And so where it comes to actually watching the horoscope for a particular placement in your chart, let's take the sun, for example, right? Because that's a very common way of watching horoscopes. The sun is a representative of sort of where you find your center, your light, where you feel like yourself over the course of this lifetime. It's where you become more self-possessed slowly but surely. And it is where you connect with that part of you that knows that you are worthy of shining and being seen for the things that you admire within yourself. And so one very common technique is called a solar chart, and that's what most horoscopes are based on, a solar chart. And basically what that does is, for those of you who have some familiarity with houses, it puts the sun in the first house and then goes by whole signs going forward. And so, for example, if you are an Aries, to keep it really simple, right? Aries, first sign of the zodiac. Let's say you're an Aries. So we'd create a chart, we'd put your sun in the first house, you're an Aries. Now, what's happening in the sign after you, right, is the second house. It has to do with self-worth. It has to do with finances as well. In this case, it's going to be the sign of Taurus. And so whatever is happening in the sign of Taurus is speaking to finances for you, because it is in your part of the sky, what we call houses, that has to do with finances. And so Western culture really emphasizes the sun sign, as sun as a symbol of the self, where the individual is the nucleus of the culture. Eastern culture, for example, in Eastern culture and the astrologies of those cultures emphasize the moon, because the moon is more a symbol of family, of communal living and community as well. It is a symbol of tradition as well, an identity that's rooted in that. And so those cultures, the nucleus of those cultures are the families, is the community. And as such, the astrology responds to that, and the moon becomes a more important symbol in those cultures. And so if we were to create a lunar chart, for example, we would put your moon in the first house, And let's take an example of making the moon a different sign. Let's say the moon is in Libra. Okay, so the person who has their sun in Aries, the solar chart puts the sun in Aries, whatever's happening in Taurus speaks to finances because it is the part of the sky that has to do with finances for them. If you have your moon, if you're doing a lunar chart, you put your moon in the first house, your moon is in Libra. The sign immediately after Libra is Scorpio. And therefore, whatever is happening in the second house of your chart, of that lunar chart, in the sign of Scorpio, is going to speak to finances in some way from the perspective of that moon, from the perspective of a lunar chart. And that's how a lot of astrology, especially when we look at sun sign astrology, lunar astrology, that's how a lot of astrology is understood. And I think that there's a lot of value in this technique. It's one technique. And I know that I've benefited from it, certainly, at many points in my life. It's spoken to me many points in my life. And so I'm really happy and I'm really happy to be a part of sharing that in the world as well and contributing to that in the world as well through the video scopes that you see. And then there's also rising sign, of course, which is based on your exact moment of your first breath. So the rising sign you can watch as well. And people who have a strong familiarity with their chart might not need to use whole signs, might be able to understand where it is in their chart that a certain placement is happening and be able to watch the video according to that. If you want to watch for any other planet, you can do that, but understand that you are looking at the sky from the perspective of that planet or that chart point. And so the North Node, when you are watching a horoscope based on the perception of your North Node, what you're doing in that case is working with the energy of the North Node. Okay, and this is awesome. If you are a person who wants to start working with the energy of your North Node, one way that you can do that is start looking at the horoscopes for the sign of the node. And so, for example, if your North Node is in Scorpio, then what is happening in the sign of Sagittarius is going to speak to self-worth, financial issues from the perspective of that North Node, that part of you that desires to move towards greater love and greater wisdom. And how self-worth speaks to that part of you is going to be highlighted. Now, I say this with a bit of a caution because the North Node is about what's happening on a level of spirit, what's happening on a level of soul. It's not necessarily as conscious an energy as, let's say, Venus. Okay? Now, let's talk about Venus. If you wanted, you could do a Venus chart as well. You could say, you know, I know that my Venus sign is Capricorn, for example. And therefore, if you are actively trying to cultivate, to strengthen, to bring forward your own Venus energy, because all the planets, as I like to say, and I say this repeatedly in my book, Astrology Realized, all the planets represent parts of the soul. They speak to parts of the soul. The signs that the planet is in is its most immediate expression. And it's kind of like, you could think of it as a coat that particular part of your soul is wearing. So that's how that part of your soul that has its needs, as part of complex human beings, we have varying needs. Venus is love. We have a need to be loved. We have a need to feel that we are worthy to receive. We are worthy of receiving love. That part of us expresses itself by the sign that it finds itself in. Let's say that sign is Capricorn. So in a Venus chart, you're a person who wants to emphasize your Venus energy. You want to focus on that energy, strengthen it, learn about it, and really understand how to work with it. One way you're going to do that is to work with Venus charts. So you put Venus in the first house. Therefore, what's happening in the sign of Aquarius, the sign immediately after Capricorn, is going to speak to issues of self-worth and finances and how they relate to the development and growth of your Venus energy are going to be indicated by that. And the house, okay, so just to further along the thread I started before, planets are aspects of the soul. The signs that those planets are in speak to the most immediate and natural expression of that part of your soul. And the house is where, in your birth chart, the house, or in any given chart, the house that particular planet is in that particular sign, is its most natural area that that part of your soul is going to find its expression, going to want to express itself. So that's just to complete the thought. So if you're looking at a Venus chart, for example, you're going to put Venus in the first house. Therefore, what's happening in the sign of Aquarius, that's the second house from the perspective of Venus, speaks to finances, self-worth, and more. What's happening in the third house has to do with perception, with communication, transmission of information as well. Where it comes to the development and strengthening of your Venus energy, you're also going to look at what's happening in the sign of Pisces, because what's happening in Pisces is speaking to what's happening with Venus. Now, this can get like a lot of information, right? If you have a person who has what's called a splash chart, where you've got lots of planets in lots of different places, you might end up having to watch all video scopes or all the signs every given week, every given month. And you could do that. I do personally like to work with an individual planet, an individual energy at any given time as part of learning and strengthening that part of myself at any given time, depending on the lessons that I'm going through and what it is that I'm trying to develop in myself, what it is that I'm trying to strengthen in myself. And so these are conscious ways of working with these energies and conscious ways of understanding the relationships that different planets have with a living sky, with a sky that continues to evolve. And so, yes, your birth Venus might be in the sign of Capricorn, but wherever Venus is right now is also speaking to your birth Venus. Wherever the entire sky is right now is speaking to your birth Venus and helping that birth Venus to become more than it knew itself to be before. So the short answer is yes. If you choose to work with your North Node energy, yes, absolutely. You can watch the horoscope and consider it in the context of your journey towards greater love and greater wisdom, your journey towards personal evolution. Consider it in that context and work with that energy to help you along your unique journey.